Prologue. In the cold haze of a February morning in 1677, the philosopher Baruch Spinoza, heretic, exile, mystic of logic, breathed his last in a modest room in The Hague. Officially, it was consumption, tuberculosis, that claimed him. But those who knew him, those who truly paid attention, noted something curious in the way his decline unfolded. His mind remained sharp as diamond while his body wasted unnaturally fast. And the lenses he polished with such care, his solitary livelihood, began to seem like artifacts of another will. The streets outside his lodgings were quiet that day. Few mourners gathered. No rabbi recited Kaddish. The man who had redefined God as nature itself died without ceremony, his books already condemned, his name a whispered caution in the synagogues of Amsterdam. Only a handful of friends, Christians, scientists, fellow outcasts, marked his passing. They did not suspect murder. Not then. Centuries later, in a forgotten corner of an Amsterdam archive, a young historian begins to untangle a conspiracy hidden in glass and silence. Dr. Ilan Vermeer, a specialist in early Enlightenment philosophy and a scholar of Jewish Dutch history, had spent years assembling fragments of Spinoza's life, letters, rabbinical decrees, merchant invoices. The excommunication of 1656, Spinoza's isolation, his deep friendships with radical Christian dissenters, and his devotion to philosophy, these were well known. But Ilan stumbled across something else. A letter. Torn, half-burned, never sent. She cannot marry a man condemned by the very blood that runs in her. And if the council permits it, I will find a final solution. He will not live to defile what I have built. There was no name. But the letter was enclosed in the private papers of a well-respected lens-maker, David de Herrera. Ilan sat back in his chair, the archive's fluorescent lights humming above him. Outside, Amsterdam continued its modern dance of bicycles and trams, while inside, a murder from 3 centuries past began to take shape. He looked again at the letter, noting the fine handwriting, the expensive paper, the carefully formed Hebrew characters interspersed with Portuguese phrases, all hallmarks of the Sephardic elite of Amsterdam. De Herrera was not merely a craftsman but a pillar of the community. His lenses adorned the instruments of scholars throughout Europe. His daughters were raised in the strictest traditions, sheltered from the philosophical upheavals of the age. To have one promise to Spinoza, and then to watch that promising young man transform into the community's greatest shame, what would that do to a proud father? Ilan's fingers trembled slightly as he requested the next box of documents. The archivist, a woman who had grown accustomed to his presence over the months, raised an eyebrow. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Dr. Vermeer." "Perhaps I have," he replied. "The ghost of a murder long forgotten." Before his excommunication, Baruch Spinoza was not yet the philosopher we know. He was a young man of promise, gifted in Talmudic study, proficient in Latin and mathematics, and heir to a respectable position in the Jewish community. As custom dictated, he had been promised in marriage to Rivka de Herrera, daughter of the renowned glass artisan David de Herrera. The engagement was unspoken in the records, kept informal by mutual understanding. Such arrangements needed no documentation when families were aligned in class and custom. But when Spinoza's views became dangerous, when whispers of his heresies reached the synagogue elders, his fall was swift and absolute. Harem. Total excommunication. Yet, as Ilan uncovered in municipal legal codes and communal statutes of the period, the promise of marriage still held force, even after expulsion. Unless annulled by mutual consent or death, the contract stood. Spinoza refused to annul. Rivka, bound by silence and fear, never defied her father. But someone needed the matter settled. Ilan reconstructed what he could of Rivka's life from sparse mentions in community records. Born in 1635, she would have been 21 at the time of Spinoza's excommunication, old enough to have known him, perhaps even to have formed an attachment. Her education, while limited by the standards of men, would have been exceptional for a woman of her time. The daughters of wealthy Sephardim often learned multiple languages, music, and household management. Had she harbored secret sympathies for Spinoza's radical ideas? Had she slipped him books from her father's library? The community records noted that after Spinoza's excommunication, Rivka fell ill for several months, a mysterious melancholy that confined her to her father's house. In 1659, 3 years after the Herrem, she married Jacob Pereira, a widower twice her age with connections to the diamond trade. The ceremony was lavish, as befit the daughter of de Herrera. No mention was made of any prior arrangement. The matter seemed closed. But in a diary kept by Rebecca Cardozo, a cousin of Rivka's, Ilan found a disturbing entry dated just before the wedding. R. appears as a ghost of herself. She speaks little and eats less. When her father mentions the wedding, she leaves the room. Yesterday I found her with a small book hidden beneath her embroidery, one of his treatises, I fear. When I asked about it, she wept and made me swear never to tell. I am to marry, she said, but my mind already has a husband. Spinoza, meanwhile, had moved first to Regensburg, then Voorburg, and finally The Hague. His letters from this period reveal a man immersed in philosophy, maintaining connections with intellectual circles across Europe. But they also contain cryptic references to unfinished business in Amsterdam, and a promise I will not break, though all earthly authority demands it. As it is well known, Spinoza made his modest living grinding lenses for microscopes and telescopes. Few knew that the raw glass was provided not by random traders, but by David de Herrera himself. Despite the excommunication, de Herrera continued to supply Spinoza, silently, discreetly. A strange mercy. Or perhaps an insidious laid-out plan. Vermeer found ledgers, Herrera's own business accounts, listing shipments to S.B. of The Hague years after the Herrem. Most curious, however, was a marginal note beside a certain batch dated 1676. Batch J17, arsenical sand mixture, limited exposure advised. Arsenic trioxide was used in glassmaking to remove bubbles and give clarity. However, in large doses or over prolonged periods, it could kill. Ilan compared the timing of the shipments with Spinoza's letters. In early 1676, he wrote of strange fatigue, a heaviness in the lungs, yet no cough or fever. He continued to polish lenses, never suspecting they were poisoning him with each pass of the cloth. Ilan delved deeper into the technology of lens-making in the 17th century. The process was both art and science. Silica sand melted with potash, lime, and various metal oxides to achieve different qualities of glass. The grinding and polishing required abrasives that created fine dust, which craftsmen inevitably inhaled. Most wore cloth masks or worked in well-ventilated spaces. Spinoza, working alone in his small rooms, would have taken fewer precautions. The glass mixture de Herrera sent contained unusually high levels of arsenic, ostensibly to create clearer, more perfect lenses. Modern scientific analysis could distinguish between natural arsenic exposure and deliberate poisoning, but in Spinoza's time, the symptoms would have resembled those of consumption: fatigue, weight loss, coughing. More damning still was the pattern of shipments. De Herrera had sent regular supplies to other lens makers across the Netherlands and Germany, but only Spinoza received the special J17 batch. And only after 1674, when Rivka gave birth to her second child and seemed finally settled in her arranged marriage. Was it coincidence that de Herrera chose that moment to begin his slow poisoning? Or had he received word that Spinoza, now gaining recognition for his anonymous theological political treatise, might soon have the means and reputation to reclaim his promised bride? Ilan found a letter from Spinoza to his friend Henry Oldenburg, secretary of the Royal Society in London, dated November 1676. My condition worsens daily, yet I must complete my work. The ethics cannot remain unfinished. As for other unfinished business, I fear time is no longer my ally. Tell our mutual friend in Amsterdam that I have not forgotten, nor have I abandoned what was promised. 3 months later, Spinoza was dead. The investigation. Ilan's research had attracted attention, not all of it welcome. Senior faculty members questioned the propriety of accusing a respected historical figure of murder. The Jewish Historical Society of Amsterdam expressed concern about reviving old tropes of poisoning and conspiracy. A prominent Spinoza scholar dismissed the theory as sensationalism unworthy of academic pursuit. But others were intrigued. Dr. Elena Morgenstern, a forensic archaeologist from the University of Leiden, contacted Ilan after reading his preliminary paper. "If your suspicions have merit," she wrote, "modern science can confirm them. We need only permission to examine the remains." Permission proved difficult to obtain. Spinoza's grave in the churchyard of the Nieuwe Kerk in The Hague had been undisturbed for centuries. Religious authorities, historical preservation committees, and even distant relatives of the philosopher all raised objections. The process dragged on for nearly 2 years. During this time, Ilan continued to build his case through documentary evidence. He traveled to Portugal to examine records of the de Herrera family before their migration to Amsterdam. He visited collections in Paris and London where Spinoza's correspondence was preserved. Most crucially, he gained access to the private archive of the Herrera family, descendants of Rivka's husband. There, in a collection of family papers none had thought to connect to Spinoza, he found a series of letters between Rivka and her brother Isaac. They revealed a woman of considerable intellect and secret rebellion. "Dear brother, I thank you for delivering the pages as promised. Though father would consider them poison, I find in them a clarity that borders on the divine. B. Understands what our teachers only guess at, that God is not outside nature but is nature itself. That we are not punished for our sins but by them. How strange that words deemed so dangerous bring me such peace." The letter was dated 1658, 2 years after Spinoza's excommunication, and 1 year before Rivka's marriage to Herrera. She had maintained contact with the philosopher, receiving portions of his works in progress through her sympathetic brother. Another letter, dated 1670, was more alarming. "Isaac, you must warn him. Father knows of your visits to The Hague. The glass he sends is not as clean as it appears. I overheard him speaking with the chemist Mendoza about properties of arsenic that cannot be detected. I dare not write directly to B, but you must tell him to be cautious with the materials from our house." Had the warning reached Spinoza? If so, he left no record of it. And Isaac de Herrera had died suddenly in 1673, drowned in a canal on a clear summer day. The official verdict was accident. Ilan now wondered. Finally, in the spring of 2024, Ilan petitioned the University of Amsterdam for a full forensic investigation. Though controversial, his reputation secured him access. Spinoza's grave in the new church cemetery had been undisturbed for centuries. But beneath the simple stone lay answers sealed by bone. The procedure was conducted with painstaking care. Present were Ilan, Dr. Morgenstern, representatives from the Dutch Historical Preservation Society, a rabbi, despite Spinoza's excommunication, and a team of forensic specialists. The remains were carefully documented, sampled, and analyzed using the most advanced techniques available. The analysis confirmed it, elevated levels of arsenic in hair and tooth enamel. Long-term exposure. Chronic poisoning. Not a single dramatic dose, but a slow erosion of life. And in Herrera's private journal, locked in a museum vault, was a final, bitter entry, unsigned but unmistakable. Let him peer into heaven and grind the stars with poison. My daughter will not live as the wife of a blasphemer. But the exhumation revealed something else, something Ilan had not anticipated. Among the philosopher's remains, preserved in the dry soil of the churchyard, was a small glass vial. Inside, perfectly preserved, was a curl of dark hair tied with silk thread and a miniature note barely legible after 3 centuries. From R. Remember your promise. I wait in this life or the next. Had Rivka defied her father and husband to send this token? Had Spinoza carried it with him to his death? The historical record was silent on this point. But the evidence was undeniable. Baruch Spinoza had been slowly poisoned by the father of the woman he had once been promised to marry. A murder hidden in plain sight for nearly 350 years. Epilogue. The clarity of death. Baruch Spinoza died believing in a world ruled by necessity and reason. He could not have imagined that the tools of his trade, his portals to understanding nature's eternal laws, would become the means of his silent execution. The irony would have pleased him. That truth, hidden for centuries, emerged not through divine revelation but through patient study, historical rigor, and forensic science. His own method, applied to his own death. In the wake of Ilan's discovery, new interest surged in Spinoza's life and work. Biographers reconsidered the philosopher's isolation, his stubborn refusal to accept positions at universities, his insistence on remaining near Amsterdam despite the dangers. Had he stayed close not just for intellectual community but for a promised bride he could not surrender? Rivka de Herrera had died in 1697, outliving Spinoza by 20 years. Her tombstone in the Portuguese Jewish cemetery of Amsterdam described her as a virtuous woman, devoted mother, and keeper of the faith. But among her personal effects, passed down through generations and eventually donated to the Jewish Historical Museum, was a first edition of Spinoza's Ethics, published posthumously in 1677. Inside, pressed between the pages discussing the eternity of the mind, was a lens, perfectly polished, perfectly clear. The final clarity was not just in the lenses, but in the truth refracted through them, that beneath the grand philosophies and religious decrees, the heady concepts of substance and mode, God and nature, were human hearts beating with all too human emotions: love, fear, jealousy, rage. Ilan published his findings in a comprehensive monograph that swept aside academic criticism with its meticulous research and forensic evidence. But in the conclusion, he wrote not as a scholar but as a human being confronted with the fragility of genius. Spinoza wrote that all things excellent are as difficult as they are rare. How much more difficult, and rare, are they when threatened not just by the censure of authorities or the limitations of human understanding, but by poison administered by the hand of hatred? And yet his work survived. His ideas flourished. In the quiet battle between arsenic and argument, the argument proved more enduring. 3 centuries after David de Herrera thought to erase a dangerous mind, that mind continues to challenge and inspire. The lens maker is remembered only for his crime. The lens grinder, despite that crime, achieved a kind of immortality. In this, too, there is clarity, and perhaps justice.